With me is Alex Neil, Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing. Welcome, Alex. Let's begin with the Queen, because you have been reported as saying you want the Queen to remain head of state in an independent Scotland. Why?
It's always been the policy of the SNP since we were formed in 1934 that in an independent Scotland we would keep the Queen, because she's a direct descendant of the last Scottish monarch.
Not even a ballot, though, because a recent...
Well, that's not the SNP policy. I mean, obviously, once Scotland's independent, it'll be entirely up to the Scottish people to make any decision. But as far as we're concerned, this vote this year is about the transfer of political power from Westminster to Holyrood in Edinburgh. It's not about the Queen. It's not about the future of the monarchy. It's about the transfer of all the political power that resides over Scotland still from Westminster to Holyrood.
OK, so you're a Scottish Health Secretary, basically. How would you consider health in Scotland at the moment? What do you think of it?
Well, we have a number of health challenges in Scotland, some of them very similar to what other countries are suffering. For example, one of the big challenges is the ageing of our population. Over the next 20 years, the number of over 75-year-olds in Scotland will increase by 80%. Now, along with that goes all the comorbidities, the long-term conditions associated with an ageing population. So that's one of the big challenges. Another big challenge is, of course, health inequalities in Scotland. And we are determined to reduce inequality in Scotland, but it's against a background of budgets that are severely constrained by Westminster.
You see, lots of people, and certainly your Labour Party counterparts, definitely saying you should call for an inquiry. We're talking about a country where, most famously in recent years, people talked about the fact that life expectancy in Iraq was 67, minutes from Glasgow city centre, 54. No inquiry into these disparities of Scottish health on the world stage?
Well, the difference between us and the Labour Party is they want an inquiry because of no policy. We have a policy, and our policy is to reduce the age gap between those living in the most prosperous parts of Scotland and those living in the poorer parts. Now, if you look at the Glasgow subway and you took a journey from the West End to the East End, there is up to 20 years of a gap in the lifespan, average lifespan of males living in the more prosperous area compared to those living in the poorer area. We need to close that gap, and that is our policy to do so. That's one of the reasons why we're insisting on a minimum unit pricing for alcohol, because it has a beneficial impact on poorer sections of society. It's one of the reasons why we're campaigning so hard to make Scotland smoking free by 2034. That also helps people who are poorer.
What about Patients First calling on you to start an inquiry because of the gagging of whistleblowers? Again, NHS Lothian.
Well, first of all, we don't gag whistleblowers. The policy of the National Health Service in Scotland is to encourage whistleblowers to come forward and tell us anything that's going wrong. Indeed, it's the duty of any medic, written into their terms and conditions of employment, that if they see something happening that shouldn't be happening, it is their duty to report that.
What about NHS Scotland being fraudulent? Freedom of Information Act requesting 42% in the past 5 years, £800 million in fraud being talked about in NHS Scotland.
No, there hasn't been £800 million. That was a journalist's estimate. In fact, the actual amount of fraud in the NHS in Scotland is much, much lower than that. But we take a very, very robust approach to fraud, and anyone found being involved in defrauding the health service in Scotland, we will take whatever legal action against them, both in terms of their employment as well as against criminal action. So, out of all of these different cases, there's no overall inquiry that the SNP wants into healthcare in Scotland? No, what we don't need is an inquiry. What we have is a plan for 2020, and we have a plan and a vision to take the National Health Service in Scotland by 2020 to make it one of the best in Europe. Already our patient safety programme is recognised worldwide, not by me, but by President Obama's advisor on health, Professor Don Berwick. The Scottish Health Service, he says, is the safest in the world.
I'm not sure President Obama's advisor would be a good person to ask, given the chaos in IT in Obamacare.
He was also an advisor to David Cameron. He's a highly respected international expert in patient safety. He's a highly respected expert in patient safety, worldwide renowned, and he says the patient safety programme in Scotland is the safest in the world, and I think that's true.
Why do you think 72% of people have 72% higher mortality in deprived areas of Scotland when it comes to cancer rates?
Well, cancer is one of our top priorities, obviously, and it's to do very often with the lifestyle, the diet, the lack of exercise.
Nothing to do with hospital provision or NHS
No,
Scotland?
no, the hospital provision in cancer is amongst the best in Europe. We actually have a very,
can't be the
very
best
good...
if 72% high mortality for people in deprived areas.
No, that's the incidence of cancer. One of the reasons why it's so
mortality,
high,
not incidence.
Well, one of the reasons is because in order to deal and get a lower mortality rate in cancer, you need people to come forward much earlier than what they're doing. And one of the problems, particularly amongst the male population, particularly in the west of Scotland, is they are not coming forward when
so
they
it's
get
their
symptoms.
fault, it's not to do with NHS Scotland?
It's not a case of fault. I'm just saying we need to change their behaviour so that the minute the symptoms of cancer appear, or indeed of any major illness, they need to come forward right away.
Anywhere in the world.
And not wait until it's too late. Lung cancer is a very good example. Lung cancer is one of the major cancers in Scotland, and one of the problems with lung cancer very often is the symptoms. By the time the symptoms exemplify themselves, it's actually too late to save the patient.
Yes, no, these general ideas about healthcare, I think we all understand. They're discussed in parliaments around the world, but we're talking about a country where people die at an earlier age than in Gaza. And with all these other elements to it, whether it be whistleblowers or IT procurement, there shouldn't be an overall inquiry. You've already decided what you're going to do if you become the leaders of an independent Scotland.
You really need to get facts right. The average life expectancy in Scotland is far higher than the
I
average
meant
life
in
expectancy
certain areas,
in Gaza.
of course, of
well,
Scotland.
Of course you can pick pockets. Of course you can pick
Not in
postal code
Britain.
areas.
Not in England.
Of course you can. Absolutely in England. If you go to parts of Liverpool, go to parts of Newcastle, go to parts of London, you will find worse problems than you'll find in many parts of Glasgow. You have to look at the average, and the average is very good indeed. And the average lifespan in Scotland, both for men and women overall, is rising very substantially indeed.
So there won't be any need for any inquiry into healthcare in Scotland. The SNP already has a plan for how NHS Scotland, or whatever the new body might become in independent Scotland, how they will provide healthcare in the future.
We have a plan for 2020 and beyond covering both
No
healthcare.
need for consultation.
Well, we are consulting all the time in our plans, and obviously, as part of the overall plan, we then obviously look at how we need to reconfigure services, modernise services. We do that on an ongoing basis. If you look at the overall picture in Scotland, we have one of the best health services, not just in the British Isles, but one of the best health services in Europe.
Not when it comes to disparity.
Well, we're absolutely aware of the disparity issue, and it's been a problem that's been with us ever since the health service has actually been with us over the last 65 years, and we are determined to reduce those disparities. We've only been in power for 6 of those 65 years, and in fact we are tackling health inequalities in Scotland in a whole range of ways, but it is a long-term plan because this is not something that can be solved in 5 minutes.
Alex Neil, thank you.
Pleasure.